Hello, welcome to Matter's Open Door webinar series. Today, we're excited to talk about messaging purpose, how to communicate mission, vision, CSR, and ESG initiatives. Well, the communications landscape for businesses of all sizes has changed over the years, especially since 2020.
Yeah, even before the devastating series of last year's events, companies face significant challenges in being forced to take a stance on societal issues, thanks in large measure to the rapid pace set by the 24/7 news cycle, social media, and a generally more connected world. Brands require a strategic and consistent communications plan to educate stakeholders of their commitment to major issues that impact all of our lives, like the environment, diversity, social and economic justice, and LGBTQ rights. But first, who are we? We are public relations experts from Matter, a brand elevation agency. Matter combines PR, creative services, and digital marketing to create strategic communications campaigns that inspire action and build value. Your hosts today are Account Director and former journalist Claire Papanastasiou, and myself, Group Director Vanessa Taylor, and we're very excited to be talking about this. Let's get started.
All right. So we're beginning today's session with two questions because purpose can mean different things to different people. So first, what is purpose?
Well, according to Merriam-Webster, the definition of purpose is something set up as an object or an end to be attained. Intention, resolution, determination. All very noble words.
Yes, very.
Next question.
So why does purpose matter? Well, purpose has always mattered. We strive for it personally and professionally all the time. Companies and brands have several purposes going on simultaneously and constantly. Growth, profit, innovations are ones for sure. Now, however, purposes involving societal, environmental, human rights, racial and economic equity have worked their way to the forefront for businesses of all sizes around the globe.
Indeed.
No getting rid of it.
The events of 2020 brought major themes to light for brands and communications professionals. Also, it's important to remember that what we are dealing with today on the communications front has been years in the making. The rise in social media and public scrutiny brings all the more exposure to corporate missteps. Therein lies the beauty, however, because CEOs and leaders are now encouraged to be much more open to prioritizing their CSR and ESG missions. That just makes sense from a business and a branding perspective, and how businesses communicate to internal and external stakeholders is critical to protecting or augmenting the reputations, attracting and retaining talent, aligning with other organizations, and driving growth.
Companies are being held accountable for their purpose in real time, regardless of accuracy. So as a result, businesses of all sizes must be proactive in their communications across the board and sustain it. Otherwise, they risk damaging their reputations and ultimately their enterprises. An investment in communications is key and very much part of a successful business strategy, for sure. Though there must be meaningful, verifiable, measurable action behind those words.
Here, former Best Buy CEO Hubert Joly captures the essence of how businesses are embracing CSR and ESG initiatives successfully. It starts with being human, followed by action, which is why today's program focuses on the communications needs of companies, large and small, that have already made and acted upon their commitment to improving the world around them.
So if you're attending this webinar, hopefully it's because your employer has begun instituting meaningful change. And we're here to help you communicate their purpose to multiple internal and external audiences. This is an exciting time, thanks in part to increased and sustained media and social media scrutiny. Changes are afoot in corporate America, and the role of the communications professional is even more critical.
Now, these companies have already made the commitment to making the world a better place by taking action. Environmental, societal, and governance initiatives are underscored on the investment front. Note the increase in investments in sustainable assets, a 96% increase over 2019. These companies ranked highest in an Investment News list of companies with the best ESG scores, reflecting the commitment to corporate social responsibility. From Kraft Heinz's pledge to transition its global egg supply to 100% cage-free by 2025, to T. Rowe Price hiring a director of research and responsible investing.
So back to Best Buy. This is a terrific example. Look at the numbers under Hubert Joly, and then the positive media as a result of his actions. On April 23rd of this year, the Wall Street Journal even ran a feature entitled, "How Hubert Joly Changed Best Buy Without Anyone Hating Him." How would you love to get that headline? I would love to get that headline for a client. And most recently, he was featured in the coveted New York Times Corner Office columns, which published the impact of his actions as Best Buy CEO. In addition to being an effective CEO concerning ESG and CSR initiatives, externally he was a PR dream because he was authentic in leading the company. His words matched his actions.
It's worth noting that consistency in internal and external messaging, backed by action, augments relations with all stakeholders, as Joly has shown. From a communications perspective, putting a face to the business efforts is a must. The more you can humanize the initiatives, the better. Involve the leaders and beyond the C-suite to share success stories internally and externally.
And now some best practices in communicating purpose to your internal and external audiences.
Before you communicate a single word, ensure that senior leaders are committed to the mission and are in it for the long haul. They will set the tone for the rest of the organization, and just like every employee, they will serve as your purpose's ambassadors. Then be sure to engage employees themselves by letting them know your vision and actions first. Empower them to share the news of what you're accomplishing as an organization. And use a variety of communications channels to reach internal and external stakeholders. Consider generational diversity and roll out communications accordingly. For example, some might prefer one-on-one or group emails, virtual or in-person town halls, direct phone calls to select groups, internet or social media posts, letters and mailers, or a quick speech at a company social gathering. The most effective approach is almost always a combination of these different tactics, depending on the size of the organization and the nature of the news.
Great. And once you start communicating, keep it up. Send updates so your audience is never left feeling out of the loop. A consistent cadence of communications will keep your stakeholders informed, foster conversation and engagement, and give you a chance to learn from them as often as they're learning from you. You want that conveyor belt. You have information going back and forth.
Back and forth.
So the one and done approach is ineffective and a waste of time, effort, and money. Demonstrate your commitment through consistent, authentic, and transparent communications, especially during unstable times or involving sensitive topics. That's where most leaders don't want to communicate. It's actually you want to communicate then. However, be mindful of communications overload. This is very nuanced, and we're always trying to strike a balance as communications professionals. So communications overload, like email and meeting fatigue, is real.
It's very real.
Consider issuing a survey to find out how different groups would like to hear from you and how often.
Though each organization is unique, this slide here breaks down general audiences between internal and external stakeholders. COVID-19 certainly augmented the value of internal communications, and we're going to talk about this a lot. Up until recently, most organizations focused more on external audiences and whatever media coverage they could score. Internal communications were an afterthought. This was a missed opportunity to foster cohesion. In some cases, neglecting to inform internal stakeholders can hurt relations with employees, and the employees are a company's most valuable asset and most ready-made team of brand ambassadors. You can't forget about them.
So true. So ideally and practically, an organization will have a comprehensive communications strategy and protocol, which would include the mechanics of communicating organizational initiatives. So today we're focusing on the nuanced areas, though: tone and authenticity, clarity and engagement, timing and frequency.
Each communications to a stakeholder group will differ and should be tailored in style and tone for authenticity, though the overarching messages should always be consistent. Disparate and contradicting messages to your audiences undermine the entire point of communicating purpose, and it fosters distrust, which damages relationships. Keep these considerations in mind when starting to draft communications, and remember that consistency in the messaging is key.
Let's talk about tone. It's just as important as consistency in content. If the tone of communication is off, it will do more harm than good. So spend time developing your brand's tone in communications. Each will be unique depending on company culture, though these pointers can be applied to most cases.
Also, in considering tone, be sensitive to cultural differences given our increasingly diversified workforce. Even if you're a US-based company, consider yourself a global company. Once a tone is established, review the message with the mission of making it concise rather than long-winded. You don't have to say everything all at once. An appropriate balance of tone and conciseness will create clarity, and that will help you engage your audiences.
Okay, so next consideration is timing. The distribution of communications to stakeholder groups will differ depending on their roles, work hours, and time zones. Remember those time zones before you press send. Really important. Sending communications, like for example, sending communications on a summer Friday at 5 p.m. will likely be missed, or worse, considered a veiled attempt to have an announcement fly under the radar. That would damage your relationship with your employees. So after dispatching communications, check stakeholder engagement. Depending on the software your company uses, you may be able to pull analytics regarding open rates, or talk to your direct reports and say, hey, what's the vibe, any feedback from the latest communications?
Communication.
Yeah, conveyor belt.
We mentioned email and meeting fatigue earlier, which is very real. So be mindful of how often you're communicating and whether or not you're actually delivering new information. And be aware of what else is going on in the company and around the world at that time. For example, if your business just experienced a massive reduction in force, sending a feel-good community investment might have a negative bounce. So get the perspective of multiple varied individuals within your organization to make sure that you've got everything covered.
Keep these do's and don'ts in mind when determining the best time to roll out communications. A master calendar or spreadsheet on timing is key, and be sure to share with department heads early in the planning process. And also, inform your own people first. Picking up on a theme here. Inform your internal audiences first. It goes a long way. And if there are any silver linings from 2020, one would be that businesses began to value their internal audiences more, putting internal communications to the forefront.
It's really a non-negotiable.
Right.
Nothing will torpedo connection with your employees better than having them discover an important initiative in the media or on company social channels. Involve them in the process by engaging them from the get-go. And remember the time zones. If you have a West Coast office and the headquarters are based in Boston, much like our agency, make sure that you're sending that important email around noon East Coast time so that the West Coast folks are seeing it at the same time. It might seem like a really small thing, but it shows that the mothership is thinking about all of her employees. And consider technological preferences. A portion of your workforce might not use email regularly and might prefer text messages or calls or in-person communications from their managers. If you ignore the needs of an entire chunk of your audience, it might be interpreted as not valuing their thoughts and contributions, or worse.
I know, really. Now we turn to communicating purpose externally, specifically to the media. First off, though, as communications professionals, we're in the people business. And the most effective communications professional understands the value of cultivating their relationships with journalists. The same principles noted earlier, authenticity, honesty, tone, and clarity, apply here because, wait for it, just as with employees, reporters are people too.
They are?
They sure are. It's important to remember that journalists are people, just like you and me. They are professionals dedicated to serving their readers, who are also people, by the way. And if you want them to consider your news, you have to consider them with as much care as you would your customers.
So, assuming you've come up with a killer angle, before you even pitch, think hard about what reporters will need to write an accurate and compelling piece. Again, that's part of the cultivating of the relationship with the reporters. They care about their work product. And you're there to help them create the best piece possible, accurate and compelling. So make a connection, though, of what your company is doing to larger societal issues. Reporters don't work for us, right? They have a job to do, which is usually report on something very newsworthy. So be ready to show the impact. And journalists love data, so share it. Remember the Best Buy example. It's also important to remember that there are various kinds of media, and each area has specific topics they cover. Be sure that you're pitching your brand's purpose to a media outlet. Wait a minute, sorry about that, guys. If you're pitching your brand's purpose to a media outlet, that the angle will resonate with their readers. Work with leadership, hold story mining sessions with the appropriate people within your organizations to identify strong and relevant topics, and then also make sure you have that data and information on the impact.
Here are some examples of various media categories. Depending on what industry you're in, you want to take their individual needs into account. Communicating to your purpose to the media is way more nuanced than simply announcing a new product. Flesh out the angle, offer to connect them with people outside your organization who can back up your claims about your mission and your vision, and most importantly, focus on the impact of the initiative or the cause that you're pitching without precise, verifiable figures that outline the lives you've saved, the families you've fed, the jobs you've created, the communities you've supported, the environments you've protected, or the man-hours you have optimized, and how you will surpass your current success in future years. All you have are aspirations. Everybody has aspirations, and they're not going to get media coverage on their own.
So true. Here's a rundown of best practices in informing the media about an initiative. As we said earlier, tie your angle to the world at large, answer the why, describe the impact, and show it, and explain how other organizations can model themselves after you. Be strategic in pitching the story. And think this through, really, because you really want that first story to be the dream article. And that first article will set the tone for subsequent coverage. So you may be better off offering an exclusive to someone and then issuing a release instead of just issuing a blanket release to proclaim the great news and all that. Be strategic and selective.
As for social media, once internal audiences and media outlets have been informed of whatever it is that you're informing them of, leverage your news on the company's social channels. But share the post you're going to publish online with your employees in advance so that they have an opportunity to share it as well. They are your ambassadors, after all, and they should be the first to see any favorable media coverage you have secured before you leverage it online.
So here are two articles that recently appeared in the media about how two large companies are handling a highly relevant topic in today's workforce, returning to the office. This is fascinating because both companies here share the same desire of getting the employees back in the office, though the coverage differs substantially. Citigroup's approach was much more nuanced and softer than Morgan Stanley's to the right. I love this slide because it really demonstrates and underscores the value of the communications professional and the importance of communications in advancing business goals and initiatives, as well as protecting and augmenting an enterprise's reputation.
It's worth noting that Morgan Stanley CEO Gorman did recover from that quote in the article itself by explaining the importance of apprenticeship in the industry. But his bluntness had already cost him. The Financial Times ran that quote verbatim in the subhead, and then other media outlets picked it up. Citigroup, on the other hand, they made their head of human resources the face of the company. She posted the company's plans on LinkedIn and then sent out a detailed list on how Citigroup planned to reintroduce employees to the workplace. And as Claire has noted, these two cases underscore the important roles of transparency and tone in business initiatives.
Phew, okay. Covered a lot of territory, internal, external. So as you can see, there are a lot of moving parts and considerations in play when you're communicating your company's purpose. And it can seem overwhelming, though with frequency and practice, these efforts will become second nature. So keep that in mind as you communicate your company's purpose. Now, let's answer some questions. Some of our participants today provided us a few in advance.
Okay, so first up we have, we founded our business specifically to support marginalized communities, but it's going to be a while before we can share numbers or case studies. What do we do until then?
Patience. As we've been talking about all along, you need to show that you're making an impact. So if you're just starting and you're working at it, continue working at it, and be patient. Now, celebrate small successes, though. Turn your attention to your internal audiences. So if you do mark a milestone, let your people know about it, and build that relationship with your internal folks. And then you'll start measuring that impact, and then you'll start thinking about, okay, well, we have a story to tell. So, and then it will make it easier to go to the media with proof of your impact.
Especially if you're connecting to the bigger, broader industry or worldwide trend, which is something we talked about.
Yeah, and one thing too is, keep an eye on who's covering what in your targeted press, and try to strike up an authentic, as I put in quotes, which doesn't make sense, but try to strike up a relationship with them. Be helpful. Watch what they're covering so you know what they're writing about. So when you do pitch, the reporter will know that you're educated, you've been
done your
reading
work.
stuff. And that goes a long way in cultivating the relationship. Okay, here's one for you, Vanessa.
Okay.
Can purpose evolve over time? If we're a more established brand, how do we talk about change without spamming our audiences or looking like we've made an abrupt shift?
That's a very good one. First of all, yes, absolutely purpose can evolve with time. In fact, it should evolve with time. Like if you're talking about a company that was established 50 years ago, hopefully they have updated their purpose and their mission and their vision in order to keep up with what's going on in the world. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with change. The key is just making sure that you're communicating about it very honestly and openly. First, with your internal audiences, to make sure that they're on board, to make sure that they are helping you achieve your new goals as an organization, but then also externally, not hiding from the fact that things have changed for you as a company and now you have a new vision. A lot of companies have been making changes in the last couple of years in order to become better organizations, and there's nothing wrong with that. So don't hide from it, and don't try to bury it with like some kind of retroactive messaging that suggests that, oh, we've always been doing it this way. It's fine that you haven't been. What's most important is that you're doing it now and that you're taking action that will hold you accountable in the future. So that's another thing to be keeping in mind.
Great. Do you have time for one more?
Yeah, I think so.
Excellent.
Okay, so the events of the last couple of years inspired us to commit to several important ESG initiatives. That's very good. But we can't say they've been core to our business for a long time. How do we present these actions without being seen as opportunistic?
Great question. Because it really does underscore what we've been talking about today, right? And I'm going to pick up on what you said, Vanessa, the honesty. That's huge. You have to be honest with yourself as leaders and as communications professionals. And sometimes it's the communications professionals asking or telling the leadership, actually, things are not really measuring up. But really think about honesty, but also a little humility goes a long way.
Or a lot.
Or a lot, really. And just say, be honest in your communications, and you be authentic though, less defensive obviously, and just take accountability for what was, and also own what you're doing now, and try to be forward thinking, and definitely to Vanessa's point, don't run away from your past. Look at it through the lens of today and say, okay, we could have done better in the past, and this is what we're doing now, and then you build your communications around that. So again, we're looping it back to everything we talked about today in terms of honesty, authenticity, transparency. Those are things that are key in getting the most out of your relations or communications with your internal and external audiences. But it really does start first with leadership and the communications team taking a step back and looking at the past, and then looking where they are today and asking themselves, where can we make a difference in the future?
Yeah, if we haven't emphasized this quite enough, when you are going to communicate externally about what you are doing as a company, whether it's what you are doing now or what you've always done, you are inviting the public to hold you accountable for your actions. So just, that's why lip service doesn't work. that's why, oh, we're doing it too, doesn't work. You need, if you're going to put the message out there, you're on the board, like you're on the grid. Everybody knows now what you plan to do as an organization, and you have to back it up in the future. Yeah. So just be ready to have that continuous, open, honest, little humble communication in the future.
Accountability.
All right, I think that does it for today. Thank you all for joining us for today's session on messaging purpose. We really appreciate your time, and we are available to answer questions and provide pointers to anyone in need. For those who are interested into diving into any part of the subject matter to a greater depth, please remember that you are welcome to sign up for office hours where we can talk with you one-on-one about your individual communications goals and needs and what you might be facing and what you need to accomplish as an organization in the coming years. So thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and happy pitching.
Thanks.